Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Stoney Acres Gardening. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about what you can be planting during the month of August. While you're here, please make sure you get subscribed and go follow us over on Instagram as well. So this video is meant for those of you that primarily live in zones 4 through 7. Even people in zone 3 are probably going to benefit from this. But more important than your garden zone is your first fall frost date. So I'm going to be talking about crops that we can be planting in August, and we're going to target the planting times that we're going to be doing based on when your first frost date is. So those of you that have a first frost date from about September 15th all the way through the end of October need to be paying attention to what fall crops you can be planting in the month of August. So let's get into the list. What I've done is I've broken it down into 3 different categories. We're going to talk about leafy greens, we're going to talk about root crops, and then we are going to talk about the Brassica family crops that we can be planting during the month of August. So let's start out with the leafy greens. So the nice thing about leafy greens is you've got some flexibility on what you want to do. You could either direct sow these in the garden, or if you don't have space in the garden, like right now my garden is pretty full with warm season crops, but coming up soon we're going to have some space. The potatoes will be coming out, the onions are coming out, space will start to free up, but it's going to be a few weeks until that happens. So if you've got the space, go ahead and direct seed all of these leafy greens in your garden. If you don't have the space right now, then sow them in trays indoors under some lights and get them started now, okay? So your target planting dates for all of these leafy greens are going to be 6 to 8 weeks before your first fall frost. So that's kind of the target that we are looking for. So for example, my first fall frost is October 1st. I'm going to be starting planting all of these roughly about August 1st, and we've got a little bit of a window there where we can start squeezing these in. So let's talk about the leafy greens. First on the list is spinach. So spinach is one of those crops that is just a super producer during the fall, and so get some spinach planted. You could even do some succession planting, maybe get some planted in early August, then some a little bit later in August, and spinach is going to be a great option for you this time of the year. Then anything in the mustard family. So this year we're going to try a variety called Mizuna. It's M-I-Z-U-N-A. This is a mustard that's supposed to be very hardy, and so we're going to give that a go this year, but mustard is going to do really well planted in August. Next on the list would be all of your lettuces. So your butter crunches, your romaines, and your leaf lettuces, you're going to be planting those in August, and those will be ready for a fall harvest. The other thing that I would recommend with those is, again, do some succession planting. So maybe get some planted early in August and then wait 2 or 3 weeks and plant some more so that that doesn't all come due at the same time and ready to harvest at the same time. Next on the list are a couple of leafy greens. So we've got pak choy, sometimes also known as bok choy. That does really well in the fall. I actually find that pak choy does better in the fall for me than it does in the spring, because as the heat starts to settle down in September, that causes those plants to not want to bolt as much as they do in the spring. The other one is Tatsoy, which is also another Asian green that does really well in the fall and even into the winter. It's very hardy, super good plant for you to grow, and again, that's called Tatsoy. Swiss chard is always a good mainstay for fall planting. It's going to do really well. It's very hardy. It's going to actually last into the winter. If you give it a little protection, it could go all the way through the winter. So Swiss chard is a great crop to be planting. And then also kale. All 3 varieties of kale are going to do really well this time of year. And then collards to go along with that. So you can be planting some collards this time of year. Then of course arugula is going to do really well. I usually try to hold off on the arugula till a little bit later in the month of August, just because arugula is already a pretty bitter green, and that heat can really make it extra bitter. And so if you push that one off a little bit later in August, you'll do a little bit better and maybe bring down that snappiness just a little bit to the arugula. And then last on the list is a crop that we call mosh. It's also sometimes called corn salad. This is a really hardy, very tasty, nutty flavored leafy green that does really well in the fall. but it is really sensitive to the heat. It doesn't like to germinate when it's really hot. So with mosh, I would actually hold off maybe a little bit. So plant this more towards the end of August, and you're gonna do a little bit better with those, okay? So those are all the leafy greens. Again, our target dates are 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost is when we wanna either get those planted indoors or outside. Next, let's talk about some root crops that we can be planting during the month of August. Now, with a root crop, you want to try and direct seed these out in the garden. So you're going to prioritize any space that you have available right now in your garden or that's coming available in the next few weeks for these root crops, because we don't want to be planting these indoors. We would rather be direct seeding these out in the gardens. With our root crops, we want to make sure that we are getting those planted about 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost date. So here we're talking about carrots, radishes, beets, and turnips. All of these are going to do very well planted sometime during the month of August. They're going to grow well into the fall and give you a super good harvest. In the case of carrots especially, they'll extend into the winter months. We actually harvest carrots all the way into January, and so now is a good time to get all of those root crops direct seeded out in your garden. And then last on the list is our broccoli family, or our Brassica family plants. So here we're talking about broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi, okay? All of these can be planted during the month of August, but it's best if you plant these using transplants, okay? So hopefully you've already got some transplants that are ready to go, and you're gonna be putting those out sometime during the month of August. We wanna target about 4 to 6 weeks before your first frost date to get those set out in the garden. In us that live in the colder zones, 4 through 7, we're almost out of time to do direct seeding of these crops in the garden. So it's better to put those transplants in. So if you haven't already started some transplants indoors, go to your local nursery and ask them if they can bring some in. There's a lot of growers that will do some of those in the fall. So if you go specifically ask a nursery to bring in some broccoli, bring in some cabbage, they'll be able to get some plants for you that you can get planted about 4 to 6 weeks before that first frost date. For us, we try to target about 4 weeks before the first frost, which is right towards the end of the month of August, okay? All right, so there you go. Those are our crops that you can actually be planting during the month of August. Now, I did want to take just a minute and talk to you about a couple of issues that you might face planting this time of year. It's hot. I recognize that. Right now, our temperatures are in the high 80s, low 90s. We'll probably get back into the hundreds fairly soon, and so it can be a little bit hard to get these fall crops to germinate during the month of August. So one of the things that I recommend for you is you get some burlap. So burlap is this fun little product that you can get at a garden center, and you throw that down over the top of your beds after you've planted your seeds. Water the beds first good, and then throw the burlap down. And then every day you are actually going to go out and water the burlap, basically. And that will then help to keep the soil cool and help to keep things shaded and get those seeds to germinate. Then they'll get up and going, and you can take the burlap off. Maybe if it's still pretty hot, you might consider putting some shade cloth over that bed for a little while, and that should kind of help get things moving along. I did do a video on using burlap to start carrots, and there's a link to that right up there. The other thing that I would recommend that you take a look at is finding some ways to protect all of these seeds that you're planting during the month of August from frost and cold weather as the fall starts to approach. So start thinking about things like fabric row covers, maybe some mini hoop houses that you can put over the tops of your beds, or possibly a cold frame or a greenhouse to help protect these crops and extend your growing season. If you use some of those things like that, for example, we use some cold frames over the top of our carrots and our spinach, and we end up being able to harvest all the way through the winter. We'll have crops that we're harvesting in January and February from those cold frames that we planted in August. And so think about those things as well. All right, so before we go, I did want to mention this, and I don't want to do a super hard sell on this, but we do have our fall and winter seed collection that we are selling through True Leaf Market. So this is the Stoney Acres Fall and Winter Seed Collection. It's a collection of 14 different seeds that you can buy, all of which I talked about today. Okay, these are my hand-picked varieties, my favorites for growing in the fall, and you can get this package really inexpensively. So 14 different packages of seeds, and the cost is only about $17. So it's right around that $17 mark. So it's a really good way to get a fall garden going. So this collection is available now on True Leaf Marketplace. I've included a link in the description of this video so that you can go check it out. Again, it's only $17 for 14 packages of seeds. Really, really good deal. So go check that out. Okay, that's all I have for you for this week. Everybody make sure you get subscribed to my channel. Go follow us over on Instagram as well. We'd love to have you join us, and we'll talk to you next week. Happy gardening.